Okay, so we're going to be doing 5.2c, which is rounding decimals to the nearest tenths and hundredths. So I have a number here. This is read as 0 and 143 thousandths. If I'm rounding to the nearest tenths place, well, let's start with the nearest whole. If I'm rounding to the nearest whole, this is the whole number. And right now that's a 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the digit behind the place I'm rounding to. Okay, now right now this is a 1. So the tip is if the number is 5 or more, the underlying digit gets to be raised up. If it's 4 or less, this stays the same. So the way I think of this is a parent and a child going to an amusement park. This is the mom because that's the one who's holding the hand of the child. The child determines whether or not we get to go to a big ride or we have to stay in Kiddie Town, if you will. In order to go up a ride, the kid has to be 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. If they're less than 5, then they have to stay where they are. So mom stays at 0, the decimal stays. Everything else behind the underlined digit or the mother stays a 0. So this number would round to a 0. But if this was a 7, this number is 5 or more. So it's higher than 5, which 0 will turn to a 1, and everything else turns into a 0. That's if we're rounding to the nearest whole. So now I'm going to do rounding to the nearest tenths. Put this back as a 1. Okay. So the tenths place is this place right here. This is the tenths place. This is the place that's going to be changing. Everything in front of it is either going to change or stay the same based on what happens to this. So standing behind the tenths place is the hundredths place. The hundredths place determines whether or not this becomes a 2 or stays a 1. Since this is less than 5, this stays a 1. And everything else behind it turns into a 0. Okay. Now, if this was a number like, let's turn this into a 7. No. Let's turn this into a 9 and this into a 7 and a 3. And I'm still rounding to the nearest tens place. Well, here's the tenths place. Behind the tenths place is the 7. It's more than 5. So this is going to go up 1. Well, if I add 1 to 9, this becomes 10. Now, just like with any number, I can't put 2 digits in a place. So I would have to carry over or regroup. So now this, the 0, is now a 1. This tenths is a 0, and everything else behind it is a 0. Okay, that's if we're rounding to and the 9 goes up higher. Now let's take this number, make a new number. I'm trying to do as many as I can on one board. I lost my marker lid. Oh no. Okay, so if I did 0 and 182, and I'm rounding to the nearest tenths place. Here's the tenths. The digit behind is what determines whether or not they go up or not. Everything in front of the box stays the same. The digit behind the tenths place is 5 or more, so it's more than 5, it's an 8, which makes this number change into a 2. And everybody behind it turns into zeros. And that's when we're rounding to the nearest tenths. Now we're going to round to the nearest hundredths. All right, so if I took this digit, this number, I'm going to do two different numbers. Let's do 0 and 552. That's one number. If I did 2 and that's another number. And if I did 3 all right, and we're rounding to the nearest tenths. Sorry, hundredths. Here's the hundredths place. The digit behind the hundredths place determines what's going to happen. Everything in front of the boxed up number stays the same. For now, it may change once we change this. The number behind the tenths place, the hundredths place, is a 2, which means this stays the same, and everything else turns into a 0. Now this one's a little bit different because this is a 9. The digit behind the 9 is a 7, which means this 9 is going to change up 1. So if I have 9 and I add 1 to it, this becomes 10. So everything in front of the box stays the same unless we added a carryover. It's hard to see. So 2 and 97 thousandths rounds to 2 and 100 thousandths. And the last one that we're going to do, this is a 0. The number behind it is a 7. 7 is higher than 5. So 7 is going to change this 0 into a 1. Everything in front of it stays the same. Everything behind it turns into a 0. That is rounding decimals.